So one thing I want you to get out of this is that the concept of process can drive enterprise performance across virtually everything that an enterprise needs to do. So a couple things you need for that is one is obviously a great tool like Glue, but you also need to have the right framework, implement the right methodologies, and be aligned with your people in how you do this. So I'm going to show you kind of the concept, but I'm also going to show you an illustration of this just to make it real and really show you how AI can enable great performance. So a little bit deeper about me. So I grew up in consulting industry. I've spent about 25 years as a consultant. And what I valued from that experience is, but if you get exposed to that many different types of scenarios, you start to see patterns of why things fail. And that's where I came up with this concept called process inventory, which I'll explain in great detail, but it's really just simple. It's inventorying every single process you do. And I'll explain why that's important. So I developed the framework and then started implementing it in a wide range of projects, and it worked in every turn. I went to Citi and I was head of process excellence for the U.S. retail bank, and their context there was they had a very large consent order with a $400 million fine, so they started a control transformation program, and I really got to use this to demonstrate how process can be an answer to risk and compliance challenges. I left and I created my book. I felt like I needed to get that knowledge out there. Digital transformation and success. I'm not here to sell a book, but if you like what I talk about, then the book is available on Amazon. And now I have my own consulting company where I advise companies on how to do this at scale. And this is a stat you've probably all seen. It was a McKinsey stat. It's 70% of transformations fail. And a transformation is a fundamental change of how an organization operates and delivers value to their customers. But the implications of risk is lost investment. So a lot of them go over budget, frustrated stakeholders, unsatisfied customers. And in today's day and age, customers can vote with their feet. They have power. And if you're not giving them the experience they're looking for, then they'll leave you. In our everyday work, we need to look for ways to be more efficient, drive higher quality, et cetera. And process is the key to that. The root cause of that 70% stat and the struggles really is really the complexity of our organizations and frankly, the chaos. Our organizations don't necessarily grow intentionally. They just evolve over time and grow as business needs and different requirements are placed on the organization. But that leaves a lot of complexity of overlapping systems, overlapping teams, spaghetti diagrams of how technology works, etc. So it's really hard for anyone to understand everything and all the connections and implications. And our organizations are composed of diverse sets of teams that have unique perspectives and languages. So, and I love this famous tree swing cartoon as an illustration that just shows how people view things at the different lenses and the miscommunications and the failed collaboration. So customer explained it one way, the project leader understood it a different way, and you could see the different tree swings that are envisioned by these different groups. And really, what we need to do is get to a common language. And and I think the 30% that succeed or so, I think it's caused by leadership that has just superhuman capabilities, that has their sorry, has their has a really good insight into everything that's going on, but that's not replicatable across many organizations. So there's a need for a new way. So there's two parts of the need or the equation for success. The first is getting to systems thinking. And that's really understanding that our organization is made up of thousands or tens of thousands of parts, and understanding how those parts connect in the relationships among them and how they drive performance collectively is really important. And this diagram on the right is an illustration of how I see the world. Is the process, and this topic of process management isn't just about improving a single process or a set of processes, but it's a framework for understanding how everything connects together. So if I know my processes, then I can understand which processes have connections to customers, if there's a risk and compliance need, what data it uses, and I could go around the circle. So really process becomes the ground truth to getting to system thinking in a very real way. So if you do this the right way, you can unlock all organizational knowledge. You can provide that common language to facilitate alignment. You could ensure clear accountability for your people, break organizational silos by making things transparent and understanding more precisely how you work with teams, and really fundamentally transform the ways of working in a whole group of ways. The other is alignment. So in this graph, there's two alignments. So there's vertical alignment. So everyone from top leadership in the C-suite, all the way down to individual contributors, are aligned with what the strategy is, what the vision and mission of the organization is, and that they're in what they do in a day-to-day basis is fully aligned to that. And then there's horizontal alignment where, and this goes back to the tree swing diagram, where there's all these different teams that have different focuses and perspectives, but they all collaborate effectively and coordinate in driving that. And to me, it's very intangible. Like, you got to communicate better, you got to set goals, all this stuff, which is great, and you need to do it. But I'm talking like, how do you get there tangibly? And you need a common language. And that's what process inventory is. So process inventory, very simply, is just inventorying every process that you have in your organization. It's comprehensive, and I want to stress the comprehensive nature of it, because every single process that you perform contributes to performance of your organization. If it doesn't, then you should frankly stop doing it now. It's organizationally constructed. So in my approach, you start at the top of an organization. That could be an enterprise, that could be a business unit, whatever you define as your scope. But you just ask the leader, describe your organization, and they'll say, I do A, B, and C. And then you go down to the leaders that run those parts of the organization, and you keep walking that tree down, and you're asking people a simple question: what is it that you do? And you you turn those into, ultimately, when you get down to the process level, verb, noun, names that represent the process. And then I go back up the tree and ask everyone for a formal attestation, because if you're going to use it for all the use cases that I'm going to describe later, then everyone's got to trust that this is an accurate representation of my business. But you don't just own your process. Your boss has some level of ownership, and their leader has some level of ownership. So you're really creating a hierarchy of ownership, and it's a semantic structure for data alignment. And I'll show why that's powerful. The other thing I want to stress here too is in the concept of process management, there's a lot of different modeling concepts. There's value streams and customer journeys for end-to-end views. There's business capability models that shows what the organization has the ability to do. I'm introducing process inventory, which is define every process there is, and there's process models. But and I've seen in my experiences where you have one team doing process over here, another organization doing value streams, another one doing customer journeys, but they don't connect together. And the key is to define a meta model that shows how they connect together, so that every single stakeholder gets what they're looking for. But it's all grounded in the same version of truth for what your organization does and how they do it. And then obviously you could attach it to strategy so that you could measure the strategic value of everything that you're doing. Um, so you've created all this documentation about process. Now the natural question is, so how do I get value out of it? And there's 6 ways, and I think this largely covers a majority of what an organization can do. But strategy to impact. If I know my processes, one of the first steps in defining a strategy is doing an analysis of the environment. And if you could have an understanding of your process areas, then you could do some measurements on using a SWOT analysis, what's strong and weak, and then internally, and then externally, what's opportunities and threats. And that enables you to get to your change budget in an objective way, so that you're allocating funds to the things that are most important to you. The next two are the change process and transformation management. So if you think about process as your common language, now when I have that idea that comes out of my strategy, I could fully align it to what the process areas are going to impact it. I could define better scope. I could align requirements to process. I could do testing aligned to process. I could do my organizational change management to process. So my procedures, my job aids, my training, everything is aligned to that common language. And I could manage my transformation. So define my strategy, develop my roadmap, manage my journey, all through what's the status of processes. Operational excellence. So having an understanding of your operating environment gives you that way to identify waste and inefficiencies where there's overlapping systems or people, where there's quality issues. You could drive a lot of things from this perspective, but really, in the owner combined with ownership, get people accountable for driving a better way of doing things. Risk management. So if you if you look at, say, the ISO 31000 definition of risk, it's the uncertainty of achieving objectives. Well, how do you achieve objectives? By doing things, by process. So if you understand your processes, then you can understand where your operational risks are, where your regulatory and compliance risks are, where your resiliency, business continuity risks are, et cetera, et cetera. And it provides a common language to clean up risk data. And then the last one is enterprise architecture, or really IT architecture design. A lot of enterprise architects struggle because they just don't know what the business does, and they can't proactively engage with them in a conversation to understand their needs. And they get in this situation where there's this natural tension where the business says, "I need this now," and enterprise architects saying, "But I can't deliver it the way I in the right way based on that." And usually the business wins in that case. So that's where you get some shadow IT debt. Digitizing organizational knowledge. So there is a lot of data that describes the resources and information about how our organizations run. And if you could take that data and either migrate it or link it to a tool like Glue, you could create libraries. And when you set up your process inventory or process taxonomy, and you define your processes and even do process modeling, you could do associations. And essentially, what you're creating is a single source now of all operating intelligence or process intelligence, that you could use for all those use cases that I mentioned. So, digital twin is a virtual model of your organization, that you could feed to an AI engine. And essentially, what you're doing is you're training that AI on every single aspect of your organization. To be successful, you need to be complete. So that's why you need process inventory. You feed it operational data, and then there's all these operating signals or data about the performance of your organization that you need to feed it. And then you could use it for aligning all the ways of working that I mentioned earlier. And I do have a prototype that I want to show you with this. Let's say that you wanted to do this and you went to the leader of your retail lending business. So I would start the conversation and say, "Jane, what does your organization do?" She says, "Well, we do loan originations." Then I would go to Eleanor and say, "What does loan originations do?" And then I go down to Patricia until I can identify every single process that her organization does. Now, once I do that, I have a named person that who's responsible for the performance of how that is executed, and innovation and change. I give it a definition. I can align that process if I have a process taxonomy to what products that support. So now, if I need to make an update to a product, I know exactly what processes support it. If I want to understand the risk profile of a product, now I have that linkage because, and I'll show you, I align risks and controls to processes. I can align all the technology systems that it's leveraged. So if I want to, say, replace a system, then I know exactly what processes are impacted. I represent the roles that are involved in it, and I'll show you why that's important. So I created summary tabs for roles. I define KPIs for each process. You could see at a rolled up level one, level two, level three. And then for those that do risk management, I could feed that context and the list of processes to AI, and I could say, what are the regulators that govern those processes, and then what are the regulatory obligations? So I know all the regulatory obligations for retail lending that aligns to this. And then I built a risk registry based on process. I've seen a lot of organizations use generic process taxonomy. So one taxonomy that covers a whole bunch of different businesses. So when people are on the ground doing risk assessments, they look at the taxonomy, they're like, "This isn't what we do." So they have to make a lot of interpretations on how they align the risks that they identify to that. But that creates really poor risk data that really people can't understand because it's layered with assumptions and interpretations. So if you could use now as a data structure for, say, a GRC or risk registry, what are my actual processes aligned to that organization? Then now I could have clean data that aligns with ownership, et cetera. And this is typically risk scoring is done by a risk level, but if you do it this way, now I could do a combined risk score for the process area, for the business, and since I've linked it to products, I could do it for products. So that's all I have to show you for the spreadsheet. Now I want to show you the digital twin. I took that spreadsheet of that business, of that retail lending. I've captured everything that they do. So for this bank, I'm in the strategy team. One of the first steps I want to do is conduct an internal analysis of strengths and weaknesses. Can you create a heat map based on level 3 of the taxonomy? So you could see, now it's generated this performance heat map. So I know based on all the areas of my business, how things are trending, what are the critical processes, what are the critical strengths, et cetera. Verify military status is one of the processes in my inventory. Yeah, here's a standard operating procedure. So it finally created, so you could see roles and responsibilities, who has a role in the process, the description, the trigger events, upstream, downstream processes, and then all the steps in that process. So there's process hierarchies, process taxonomies, process architecture. I kind of look at them as all the same kind of thing. What process inventory is a way to construct those. So you could create process architectures and taxonomies in different ways. But really, I'm an advocate for roll up your sleeves, do the hard work, and really understand everything that your business does, because it's the foundation for driving enterprise performance. And there's a report I saw, State of AI, that Deloitte put out, and they asked the question, "What do you want AI to do?" And a plurality of respondents said, "Deeply embed AI capabilities into our processes and functions." Well, you can't do that unless you know what your processes are. And there's another concept is, AI, it's not just machine intelligence by itself, but you got to think of it as machine intelligence plus human intelligence for hybrid intelligence. So you need to do the hard work to understand what your organization does, and then use that as a data structure. But then it gives you all those benefits because now everything is aligned to what you actually do as a business.
Yeah. And I think also, and you mentioned that as well, but I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind is also that it gives you I think you actually use the same term as we do with a common language, so that you can actually talk about a process across business units, across responsibilities, because you have the same terminologies, you know what you talk about. Whereas other times it can be really difficult to just talk about a process from end to end if it isn't described, if you don't know how it connects. So really.
Yeah, and end to end is important because something like a value stream cuts across organizational constructs. So, you know, so you lay out what are my stage one or level one stages, my level two stages, et cetera. But then if you could map your individual processes from each organization that does it, let's say I do a source to pay. So a lot of different organizations can generate need for RFPs and contracts and stuff like that. So if you have the inventory of processes, now I could look at each process and say, this fits that description and align it. So when someone says we need to improve our source to pay, you could really be complete because you've grounded that the alignment to what is complete for each organization, and you could be very specific of what has to change.
All right, we will need to wrap things up. And of course, I'll encourage you all to, if you haven't connected with Michael or me or Gluu in general, please do so.
Thank you, everyone. It's been my pleasure. I hope you gain value out of this.